Welcome back to the channel folks, and to another painting guide, and I'm pleased to say it's another 28mm guide. We would certainly like to bring you more 28mm guides, but the pressure is on us to paint Flames of War folks. That is the main focus of our commission work, and these figures here, these are a commission, but most of the time we're painting Flames of War. If you would like to get in contact with us about commissions, well, there's an email address on screen just now. Send us a message, let us know what you're interested in, and we can give you some details and some quotes. Today's subject is World War I German trench raiders from Great War Miniatures. I believe you can get these through North Star Figures. I'm going to paint them in my standard layering approach. So you might find that they're going to look quite dark until I'm nearly finished. That's not uncommon with this approach, because I start from a German Camo black brown base colour and build the layers of paint up from there. But it's more of an issue with a figure such as this, where they are very drab. You know, these are trench fighters, so they are very earthy colours that we're using. What you can see here is me building up the first layer of paint over the shade coat. Now the German Camo black brown is going to be used to create shade internally and externally, and by that I mean internally within, for instance, the folds of an arm or around the pockets of a tunic, and externally, let's say, between the tunic and a backpack, or the tunic and a strap. And this German Camo black brown, it's going to be very carefully controlled, will allow us to create a great deal of depth in the figure and help it stand out nice and clearly on the tabletop. And I'm starting by what I call mapping out the shape of the tunic or the trousers. By that I mean I'm going to find the main folds, the main raised or flat areas, and give them a coat of the dark mud. That will leave the shade colour in the recesses. And we want to come back to that, because first of all, it's always going to take you 2 coats to get the coverage that you need, and you don't want to be leaving too much of that shade colour. It's an accent, not a dominant colour. You'll find the colours that I've used in the description below, but I'll talk you through it as I'm using them. And the colour I'm starting with here is German Tank Crew 2 from the Panzer Aces range. Here you can see me applying the second coat of German Tank Crew 2. So this is going to be the final coat. It's going to be the one where I'm going to use the map that I've created with the first coat. I'm going to make sure I've got a nice opaque surface, but a nice smooth surface, and then I'm going to work down all the shading so that I'm only leaving small amounts, sufficient amounts to create depth and definition, and also to avoid, as I said, leaving too much shade. Now that is also particularly important in recessed areas. Remember how figures are cast folks, you know, elbows tend to be in contact with the flanks of the figure. You want to make sure you're getting into that as much as is required to cut out the shade so that it's only in the deepest recesses and you've got the uniform colour visible more than the shade, even in those deep areas, or the shade will take over. As a field grey colour, I'm also using Panzer Aces Dark Mud. It's darker than the German Tank Crew 2 and it's a bit dirtier looking, but having the 2 different colours adds a bit of variety whilst keeping everything in the same kind of ballpark. You can use, for instance, one colour on the trousers, one colour on the tunics, or in some cases I've given them grey trousers, as you'll see, but it's a good combination. It helps add variety and make them look a bit more characterful and battle worn. So that's us got our shade in, we've got our main colour in, the main colour is dominant. Now we need to add highlights, and for both of these uniform colours I'm going to use the same highlight, and that's going to be green grey. This is a great colour for highlighting World War II subjects, vehicles as well as the figures themselves, because it lightens edges without brightening edges. Just with the shade, the highlight has to be carefully controlled here. It's very easy using this approach to put on too much highlight and everything starts to look streaky and stripy and quite unnatural. The highlight is just as much an accent as the shade. So I'm using a small thin brush with a good point, with paint that is thinned enough so that the paint will flow nicely off the brush in one pass and give an opaque line, thin line folks, but it won't spread, it won't soften when it's on the figure. We want to do this in one good solid pass. We're after solid layers of paint in this process, remember folks. So what am I doing here? I am first of all thinking about framing the figure by painting a highlight on the external edges, such as collars, cuffs, hems and so on. The internal highlighting is typically going to be raised folds on the uniform, or where there are flat areas we're going to be creating some nice contrast directly by painting a highlight line next to the shade line. When we do that, we get a really good strong transition from dark through highlight to the main colour, which really makes it stand out on the tabletop. But elsewhere, we really just need to catch those raised areas and help draw the eye to them, and that will help define the shape for the bulk of the figure on the tabletop. I'm also going to be giving some of these figures grey trousers just for another bit of variety, make them look a bit more battle worn. I won't show that in detail because it's the same process, but the colours I'm using here are shade colour, not German Camo black brown, but German grey. The main colour then being dark grey with a highlight of London grey. Any similar sort of colours should work fine. For the leg wraps or the gaiters, I'm going to use green grey as the main colour. Now I'm going to keep German Camo black brown as the camo colour here. If you wanted, you could go a bit lighter and use perhaps olive brown, so there's not so much of a contrast, but I'm going to keep things simple and quick here and work with the shade colour the same as much as possible. To soften the contrast down a little between the shade and the main colour here, I'm taking the green grey and doing a bit of it's either going to be a light wash or a heavy glaze depending on your point of view, but basically using very thinned green grey over the whole surface, making sure it doesn't pull in recesses because that's where we want the shade to be, but it does make a softer transition. Then to highlight, I'm going to turn to Deck Tan. It's a nice bright colour. It's kind of white but not white. You know, it's a great base colour if you're painting white, by the way folks. But just carefully pick out all these lines and we'll get a nice well defined shape with the contrast we've created here. Now these figures have all got prominent satchels full of grenades, so I'm going to paint this fabric in US Field Drab as a shade colour, Old Wood as the main colour and Iraqi Sand as the highlight. You'll see I'm painting the US Field Drab all over the internal areas of these satchels, as in I'm only leaving the German Camo black brown shade external, so it's framing the shapes. And remember folks, it might take 2 coats of paint to get this down in a nice smooth opaque finish, so don't rush it. Then the main colour is going to be Old Wood, so just as with the uniform, I'm not going to leave a lot of the shade colour in here folks, just enough to create a bit of definition. There is some sculpting that's visible, some folds that's visible on these satchels, so use that as a guide and map it out from there, just like with the green grey. Then Iraqi Sand as a highlight to help everything pop and bring it into focus, and once again keep this in proportion. Now some detailing. There's lots of little things on here folks, I'll cover it as much as is reasonable, and I'm starting with a shade colour of flat earth on what's going to be the bread bag, and also handles of spades and grenades and such. And where we used US Field Drab as the shade colour on the satchels, we're going to use it as the main colour on the bread bag. And note, we're still using the layering approach even in these small detailed areas. And the highlight colour is going to be Old Wood applied in the same controlled manner. On the handles for the spades and the grenades, I'm going to go back to the Old Wood colour and paint just very rough impression of some wood grain. Then I'm going to use a very heavy glaze of the old wood, and that'll just bring everything together, unify the surface, create that wood grain look we're after, and we don't need to do much more than this. There's quite a lot of leather strapping on these figures, so I'm going to use German Camo medium brown as the main colour for this. And remember folks, we're still doing the layering approach, so we're leaving them with a definition, a line of the German Camo black brown shade colour to make them stand out against the background of the uniform. I'm also going to use it as a shade colour on the water bottles. And to highlight the straps, I'm going to use a very fine and controlled edge of orange brown. This is a very bright colour, we don't want to overdo it, but on this scale it gives a nice worn leather edge look to things. And it's US Field Drab as the main colour for the water bottle, and you can see I'm mixing up the same colours, using them in different layers and getting quite different results. That helps us speed through the process, but also keeps the whole thing generally unified. The rifle stocks I gave a coat of chocolate brown, a nice dark brown that is lighter than the shade colour, but it's going to be quite dark so that we can then create a wood grain against it. And I'm going to create that wood grain using flat earth. It's quite a simple process, it just requires to paint lines along the various sections of the rifle stock. Just make sure that your contrast isn't too extreme between the grain colour and the shade colour. Then it's a very light glaze of the shade colour, the chocolate brown, just to unify the surface. One of these figures has a bedroll, and I'm going to paint that with German Camo beige, which is quite a bright colour. A more realistic colour may be a grey, a dark grey or such likes, but it's not really going to stand out here, so I'm just going for a lighter kind of colour. And remember folks, get right in and around the entire shape of the bedroll here. It's got an external surface and an internal surface where it curls in towards where in this case you can see a little food tin. I'm also going to use this colour to paint the bandolier that one of the figures has, and I'm also going to use it for the rifle straps. Then for a highlight, a nice bright colour, once again deck tan. As it's bright, keep those highlight lines nice and tight and controlled so it doesn't become too light, but it's also a handy way of also sort of bleaching out the colour if you want that look and use a little bit more of the highlight colour. Now for the metallic areas such as the grenades, the components of the rifle, the spade that is in the hands of some of the figures, I've given everything a coat of black, and then I'm going to use Luftwaffe uniform as a metallic blue colour rather than use metallic paints. You can of course use metallic paints with no problem at all here, but this is just a personal choice of mine, especially when I'm painting with a layering approach, not to use metallic colours. Then it's back to that old favourite of mine, deck tan, for a highlight, and not just a highlight but also to give it a bit of a metallic. Then I'm going to take the Luftwaffe uniform once again and apply it as a glaze over the surface just to unify the very bright highlight against the darker background. And don't forget the grenades that are in the satchels that they're carrying. There's a lot of them here folks. They're tricky to reach because they're recessed quite deep down, but even if you make a mistake, we're doing a layering approach here, so we're not having to recreate washes, dry brushes or such likes. We can just put the correct layer of paint over any errors we make. I want to add a red trim to the uniform for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's visually attractive, you know, it's a nice step to take. Secondly, it also helps frame the uniform. You know, if you've got this trim along collars, cuffs, hems and so on, then it's really going to help focus the shape of the uniform against the rest of the figure. So it's a useful step to take where it's appropriate. Certainly you couldn't do this for Second World War, but you can do this for the First World War. So I'm starting by painting the trim with burnt cadmium red. It's a nice dark red colour, and that'll be the shade colour. Next up, it's red. That's what it says on the bottle, folks. No fancy names, it's just red, and that is going to be the main colour that's going to make this edge pop. But it's careful to remember that you're going to leave a little band of that burnt cadmium red between that bright red and the uniform green. And to my eye, and hopefully you agree, we can see the whole uniform, the whole tunic starting to come into focus, and as a result drawing everything else into focus too. Next up, the skin and the eyes. So I've started with saddle brown as a shade coat on the hands and face and any exposed skin areas. There's going to be no internal shade left there, folks, using the German Camo black brown. It's going to be solid saddle brown. And at this point I'm going to paint the eyes. So I'm not going to paint the whole face and try to put the eyes on top, folks. That's a recipe for disaster. We want to do it at the early stage and then paint around the eyes, because that way we're going to get the eyes right and not have to correct it and then fix it and then correct it and then fix it and get into that terrible cycle of painting eyes when things go wrong. So you can see what I'm doing here is approaching from the side, and I'm using an off-white kind of colour here, deck tan or off-white, and just painting a simple little line, and if we make any mistakes at this point we can fix the shape with the saddle brown. And for the pupils I'm just going to paint a line using German Camo black brown. You could use black, but it's maybe just a bit too much of a contrast. But just paint a thin line through the eye, and once again if it goes on to the saddle brown, that's an easy fix. If we screw this up, it's very easy to start all over again at this stage. The main colour of the skin is going to be Panzer Ace's flesh base. Now to start with I'm going to do the hands, and they're really straightforward, folks. Just look at your hand. You've got finger bones, so you want to maybe just paint a line of the flesh base down, leave the knuckle a little bit darker. That might seem illogical, but the eye will see the shape that we are creating and work around any shade that might seem out of place. Once again, the back of the hand has also got tendons that go up the back. Whilst they don't stand out ridiculously strong, they can be seen much more better on a figure if you paint lines up the hand in the same way as you did on the fingers, but without so much shade on the palm. And again for faces, let's build it up naturally as we would expect to see a face. We've got a nose, then we have top lip, bottom lip, chin, cheekbones and ear. Now you might also have, depending on the sculpt, have a brow, and that looks good too because that will frame the eyes quite nicely. Be careful around the eyes, folks, and make sure you're just leaving enough shade to help create the shape of the face. Don't leave too much. The saddle brown is there just as an accent shade in the same way as the German Camo black brown is. It's a nice warm shade colour, that's why we're changing to saddle brown, but don't leave too much. Now for the highlight, apply it in small quantities as before on any other area that we're doing layering on. I can't tell you what colour I've actually used here, folks, because the bottle is so old the label's fallen off, but it's just a light coloured skin tone. Now pay particular attention to the face. You want to highlight the nose, then underneath the eyes, and then top lip, chin, cheekbones. Don't do brows if the brows are there. Do under the eyes, that's where the light is going to hit. It's going to hit the nose, hit the cheekbones and so on, and that'll build up a nice distinctive shape that the eye will recognise as being a face. The plain helmets, I've given them a shade coat of olive brown, and then I'm going to give them a main colour, a main coat of US dark green. I'm going to leave a little bit of shade around the rim and around those little, as I call them, Frankenstein bolts that are on the side of these helmets. You can have a bit of fun with the helmets on these figures. If you do some Google searches, you'll see lots of examples where they have decorated them. There's perhaps crossed grenades, you know, using the German potato masher grenades, some skulls and crossbones, as well as the three-tone camo that you can see on some particularly well-known images. But here I'm painting a nice simple little skull and crossbones on one of them, just to make them stand out from the rest add a bit of character to the overall unit. Then for a highlight colour, you guessed it folks, it's green grey. Where would I be without it? But it just works so well for these kinds of greens. Lightens the edge, doesn't brighten the edge. That's the key for most of the highlights. For the camo helmet, I'm starting with an overall coat of US dark green, and then I'm going to start applying my patches, starting with flat earth. Take your time here folks and apply 2 smooth coats, just as we've done with the rest of the layers. Now the next colour is going to be tan yellow, and at all points when we're doing this folks, just like with any kind of camo, whether it's on a vehicle or in this case a helmet, is keeping everything in the right balance in terms of the colours, no one colour dominating too much. Tan yellow is a nice desaturated yellow, and it's a very good base colour if you're painting yellow on a figure, because it can go down opaquely and smoothly in 2 coats, and then your yellow can build up nice and brightly from there. But in this case, this is going to be our desaturated yellow colour for this particular scheme. Then it's a nice thin black line to divide all these camo patches, and you very quickly and simply got yourself a really nice attractive looking camo helmet. And that will be us done for this project folks. Hope you enjoyed it. It's something different for the channel, I'm glad to say. I will, if I get time, add more different kind of subjects, more scale such as 28mm, but we're so busy with our Flames of War commissions just now. If you want to get in touch with us about commissions, then please do. We'll see how we can fit things into our schedule. Now there's going to be some still photographs coming up in a moment at the end, but otherwise it just leaves me to say thanks for watching as always. Thanks to the subscribers out there, and to you folks that just drop into the channel from time to time to see what we're doing. If you'd like to support us and help the channel grow and bring this kind of content to people on YouTube who don't know about it yet but would enjoy it, hit the subscribe button and that will help us out a lot. Hit the like button, and if you hit the bell button, that means we'll definitely see you all on the next one.